None of us knows what the future holds, but sometimes we see reflections in the past. By all rights, my name should have been on this wall like so many good men I served with. And in Vietnam, a sniper's bullet almost put it there. I grew up in Brownsville, Texas, a little border town. My dad raised my brother Al and me with a disciplined hand. He had a strap hanging in the bathroom that said, "I need thee every hour" on it. I liked working with my hands, fixing things, always rebuilding old cars and engines, you know. Thinking back on it, it was my dad's inner discipline, that inner power in his life that I loved most about the man. He was a minister, and he used to say that God had a mission for my life. I became a Christian when I was 16 years old. I knew God was out there, and he wanted good things for me. Memories are strange things, moments half remembered, and a lot of feelings. As a young man, I was taught that I could make my life whatever I wanted it to be. But plans get changed, and dreams get broken. And man, I've had both broken. Brokenness can be a state of mind, and it can scar and disfigure the spirit as well as the body. But life is a series of choices, and along the way, I've made a few good ones.
There are many things that you can say Dave enjoys these things or Dave likes these things, but when it comes to the joy in his life right now, the joy in his life is Jesus and Brenda, because at the lowest point, and boy, sometimes I even get emotional thinking about this, at the point when Dave was when most people would have given up, the two names that kept him going were Jesus and Brenda. And so Brenda was like 13 or 14 years old, and Dave just a couple of years older. And I mean, they were a number from then on.
Hi. You know, I've been watching, and I'm totally in love with you. And I want you to marry me and be my wife.
There never was any doubt after that she was the one for Dave.
David, if you love me, you will wait.
There had never been a girl I'd ever considered marrying. And the moment I looked at this girl, I said, I want that woman to be my wife. And I asked her to marry me. She slapped me. Of course, she was 13. She didn't appreciate the request. But it meant everything to me to be able to establish the territory I wanted to move into. I wanted her to know I had designs for her. And by the grace of God, she became my wife. I have a picture. Lord, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A facial expression is worth 10,000. When we were at your mom and dad's house, and I was in my full dress blue uniform, and then someone took a picture of us standing there together, just before we went to the airport. And my eyes and her eyes, the facial expression, there's such sadness. There's grief. There is, they're bloodshot from tears or lack of sleep, knowing it was very much like the night before you go to the gas chamber or the electric chair, you know, and it was scary, man. And I remember kissing her goodbye, and her lips, which are always sweet lips, were salty with tears. And there was a little tremble in her lips. I can almost taste it. Just right there. The tears were so real, and the agony. And I looked at her and I said, baby, I'll be back without a scar. I talk about it often. I share the story to so many people, but when I sit and reflect like this, it's more than sometimes I can tell. I can't tell it all, really. It seems like it's too graphic, and I can almost smell my flesh burning. And I've never been one to drink or do drugs, but if I didn't know Christ, so help me, I'd be stone drunk right now, just trying to deal with it, because it took away my identity.
Now, this is Kilo. We'll make a fire run, over. Kilo, this is 4-3. Let me know when you...
I guess there's some things in war that you don't understand, especially whenever decisions are not your own to be made. You just do what you're told to do. And the night before, I'd come across the worst encounter with the enemy that I had ever faced the whole time I was in Vietnam. 13 B-40 anti-tank rockets had been fired at my boat, which is only made of fiberglass. Only God knows how many small arms, and when I say small arms, I guess I should say anti-aircraft 50 caliber, as well as AK-47 and every other kind of thing they could shoot or throw at us. Our intelligence reports were that the enemy had left, that infrared had showed troop movement, and we were really back for one reason, and I knew what it was, and that was to confirm the absence of the enemy. Sometimes you just get to a point where you feel like you're burned out, and I felt that way. I was burned out. The war should have already been over for me, and for the guys I was with. There's just so much you can take, and then you start taking risks. We started approaching the area where we had faced the enemy the night before, and I was recalling, my thoughts were, boy, my cheek was swollen. It was throbbing with every beat of my heart because of the hole I'd had cut into it by shrapnel the night before. And the stitches were hurting. I didn't feel good. I didn't want to be there. I didn't start the war, and I knew that I wasn't going to finish the war. No matter what happened to me, I wasn't going to end it. And as we approached the area, my heart was pounding so hard, the trees going by in this shallow river, and we came to the grid coordinates where the enemy would be. And we beached the boat. And then I crawled forward into the gun tub, and I was standing between two 50 caliber machine guns. They're just ear level high. And as I stood up slowly and I looked forward into the brush, I couldn't be sure what I was seeing. And I thought, well, I'll throw a white phosphorus hand grenade. That'll burn this foliage down, and I can get a better view. And I pulled the pin on my first grenade and threw it, but it wasn't enough. I picked up my second hand grenade, and I pulled the pin, and I drew it back, and I was 1 second from throwing it. And when it was right beside my head, it exploded. This was my life going away from me. It was slipping away with every beat of my heart, every pump of my heart. Blood was going, skin was going. I felt numb, but I didn't feel any sharp, burning sensation. Not at that moment. That was yet to come.
My first experience of Dave after his injury, whenever I heard what had happened, I knew what had happened, I discussed it with a Navy officer who came to tell us about it. I had all this in my mind about what white phosphorus could do, that he had it over 38, almost 40% of his body. All of these things were just facts, you know. And facts are one thing, but when you walk down the burn ward of Brooke Army Medical Center, it's not facts. It's raw meat. There's no other way to describe it. And so I was sitting there looking at him, and I was struggling not just with my emotions. It was my brother, and he was, you know, hurt and scarred, disfigured. It wasn't just that, but 2 weeks before, we got word of his injury. Right here in Fort Worth, I was driving across a bridge. I'll never forget that day. I had received a letter from Dave, and in this letter he said, "Al, I feel like I'm going to get it. I just hope I get it in the rear." And so I had read that letter. It was in my mind, and I was driving across an overpass, and I started crying, and I had to pull over because I couldn't see to drive. And I said, "God, you've got to take care of my little brother. You've got to protect him. You know, your hand has got to be over him in Vietnam." And so I prayed until I got peace in my heart. And I'll never forget, I declared, I confessed, I did, you know, the faith thing, and I said, he's going to come back without a scratch.
The right side of my head was just skull. It was blown off to the bone. Right down the middle of my face and nose, everything came off. Just as you can see, I draw a line right down through here. And then it came over this way. And the blast and the heat took everything on the right side of my head. The hairpiece sits on top of my head, and the plastic here, all of this was taken completely off. There was nothing left.
Brenda was standing behind Dave, and she was massaging his scalp because that made him feel good. He had his hands up like this because both of them were burned extremely bad. If he let them down, blood would just run out, you know. So he had to keep his hands up this way. And from the middle of his skull down his face and over was all smooth skin. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was pig skin.
Whenever they had brought me off the riverbank through Saigon and got me to Japan, and I'm laying in this bed. It was a bed on a circular frame, and the bed rotated all the time. My feet were up sometimes, my head down. All this was to keep me from getting pneumonia, keep fluid up out of my lungs. And one day they stopped my bed. I was level, face up. And I asked them for a mirror. I wanted to see what was left. The fear was so intense. The curiosity demanded to know. I had to know what I looked like. And this was so horrible to me. They walked over and picked up one of these little, I don't know what you call them, mirrors, kind of dish, so that the concave, magnifies things, and girls use it for their putting on their blush and highlighter or whatever. And they held it over my face, and I looked up in the glass, and I saw my face. I didn't need any help from that glass to distort the evidence. The most desolate feeling of abandonment. I was alone now. I felt like God had forsaken me, and I had forsaken me. It wasn't even me anymore. That wasn't me. That was some hideous creature that makes Freddy Krueger look handsome. I could not deal with what I saw. And I tried to kill myself. I pulled the tube out, and I laid my head back, and I waited to die. And I got hungry. It was the wrong tube. I pulled out lunch. And I'm glad, or I would have missed the chance to live these 23 years. The most intense fear I've ever known was the fear of rejection. And I think I should preface it. There was the man that had been next to mine. This poor man, he had no skin. And that's why one of the reasons when people say, did you blame God, or did you feel like, you got a bad deal? No. I still had some of my skin. And he was guaranteed to die. He had no skin because they had no donor site. No place to take skin. And his wife came in, took off her wedding ring, tossed it between his charred feet. And she said, "You're embarrassing. I couldn't walk down the street with you." I thought, oh, God. God. what's Brenda going to do? She's a teenage girl. She came in from a standing position through a door, and I could see her when she came in. And there were nurses to protect her so that she could pass out. I mean, I'm as honest as I can be. They were there to protect her so that if she passed out, she wouldn't be embarrassed or I wouldn't be offended. My brother-in-law came in. He passed out. It didn't offend me. I rather liked it. I thought it was good, didn't you, baby? I mean, his eyes rolled up and he hit the deck. And but then I never did like brother-in-laws anyway. But it was a tremendous experience for me to see Brenda walk through the door. When she came in, it was a moment of truth or consequences. Either she was going to look at me and walk out and say, I can't take it, I don't want it, he's not mine anymore. Or it would be the beginning of something phenomenal and wonderful that would be the key to my recovery. And from my point of view, when you walked through the door, my heart wanted to stop because I didn't know what would happen next.
Dr. Davis, telephone, please. Dr. Davis, telephone, please.
I want you to know I really love you, Davy. Welcome home.
What I'm seeing is the form of a man, a blob of flesh covered over with a white medicine. He looks more like a snowman than like a real person. And I remember saying to him, "You abominable snowman, I love you."
That's right.
But I was so interested to see that he was still he still had a whole body. It was very important to me to know that he had hands and arms and legs and
Hands in particular. She's always admired my hands because I had big hands, strong hands, and hands that provided.
yeah, a real sense of security. And they were still there, but there's a lot more to life than the outward appearance. And I could tell at a glance the outward appearance had definitely changed, but it was the inner man that I loved anyway. It was the gentleness and the kindness. That's the man that I loved. I knew those qualities hadn't changed. He was still my Davy.
My dad pastored a small church in Fort Worth, and at the time of my injury, I was taken to the hospital in San Antonio for recovery. And Papa went down to pick me up in his car, and he drove me back to Fort Worth, and I was terrified by speed. They put me in their home, and my wife, of course, being there with me, and we had our own little bedroom, but I had to have so much care. And we lived right near Carswell Air Force Base, and those 52s would take off, and they'd rumble through the bathroom and out the kitchen window. And, I'd end up in the middle of the street, just terrified. I thought we were being bombed. I didn't know what was happening. I'd forgotten about that, even though I had lived there. And I was so terribly influenced by anything around me, because all of this was new data to my computer, dealing with and processing pain. And I was fed up. A year and 2 months in the hospital. Now I'm terrified by these loud noises. People are staring at me, children crying, people driving through Dairy Queens. I just wanted out. And I went down to my dad's church. I walked down. I was alone. I walked into church. Churches all have their own fragrance. They all have a particular smell about them. This church always had the fragrance of the presence of God. I walked in and I sat down on the front pew and I said, okay, God, you and me, it's time to talk. I said, I'm tired. It's been over a year now, Lord. I think it's long enough. I want you to take my scars away. And I said, I'm going to pray that you do that right now. So I prayed that the Lord would take my scars away. And I got up and I went back to the men's room and turned on the light and stood in front of the mirror and looked. They were still there. That kind of surprised me because I thought God knew how serious I was about this. And I said, God, I'm not sure you heard me, so I'm going to make sure you're listening. And I knelt down, and in my dad's church they had what some call mourner's bench, the altar across the front. I knelt down at that altar and I said, I'm going to kneel down before you. I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to get down low here where you know I'm serious. I can't take it anymore. Take my scars away. And then I added those good words that are biblical in the name of Jesus. And I even said, oh, hallelujah. And I trembled my voice to really make it sound anointed. You know, this is going to impress God. I went back and looked in the mirror and my scars were still there. So I go back and this time I'm going to get his attention. I said, God, you're not listening to me. Maybe you don't see me. Maybe I haven't got through yet. I've got to get your attention. So I crawled on my hands and knees. I crawled around those altars, crying like an old cow mooing, bawling out, God, take them away. I don't want them. Take them away. You're not listening to me, God. And I figured, crying, crawling, a veteran, God's got to be listening now. So I got up, went back, looked in the mirror, and with red eyes, I even looked worse. So I went back up and I said, now I'm going to get his attention because I'm going to threaten him. I said, God, take these scars away or else. And as sure as I'm sitting in this chair, he said to me, I could hear the laughter almost, or else what? Because whenever he said, or else what, that understanding came to me like, what am I going to do, extort him? Am I going to kidnap his mother? Say, God, if you ever want to see your mother again, you'll take these scars off my face. What can I do to force God? How can I extort him? What can I do to hold him accountable to me with? I said, God, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk out of this church. And by the time I get to that door, these scars better be gone or else. I took the longest route to that door, giving God time to think it over and make his decision, He wasn't impressed. I got to the door. I was still scarred. And I picked one foot up, and as I've always been taught, you pray with your eyes closed. And I closed my eyes. And you can't stand on one foot with your eyes closed. I said, God, take them away. And I was going to put this one on him. By the time I stepped through this door, these scars better be gone. And I lost my balance. I fell through the door, landed on my face on the other side of the threshold, rolled over, sat up, jumped up, made sure nobody was watching, felt like an idiot, and I said, God, your grace is sufficient. With or without these scars, you're the potter and I'm the clay. Whatever you make of me doesn't matter, just so you're the one who makes me. I know what they're saying, of course. They're saying, oh, wow, man, like Vietnam, it was such an unpopular war. How could you fight in such an unpopular war? That was stupid of me, wasn't it? Because popular war is so much more fun to fight, where you can enjoy getting your face blown off. And if I had just waited a while, I could have really had fun getting burned. Popular war sounds like popular leprosy, I don't see people lined up saying, oh, I want to kind of eat your face off, man. Can I please? I want that guy. I'm not into popular war. Because I'm going to tell you something, students. This mangled old body has a story to tell if I never open my mouth. You're looking at a lot of pain bundled up in one heavy-duty package. But let me make my point. It's certainly not for sympathy, because I don't want your sympathy. I don't need your pity. I just want your attention long enough to make you think today. Nobody's paying me to be here today. Do you understand that? I'm not being paid to say what I'm saying. I'm saying it because somebody's got to get up in your face and love you enough to be honest, and I will gladly be that one.
Dave was called into the ministry at 16 years old. When we were married, I was 18, he was 20. I knew I was marrying a preacher. I had no doubt in my mind that Dave Roever would be a minister of the gospel. And I can remember looking at him, wondering how the Lord would use this.
In his view of the future, he didn't see poor little old Dave getting all blowed up, bless his little old heart, and going to put him in the hospital a year and 2 months, 40% of his skin blown off, 60 pounds of flesh went up in smoke. He didn't see all of this disfigurement as a problem. He saw it as an identity with a generation of teenagers who are just as mutilated on the inside as I am on the outside. He saw it. And he says, okay, let it be. If this is going to be the devil's attack against one of my kids, I'm going to make the devil rue the day this boy was born. And God says, I'll turn your tragedy into a triumph. I'll take your scars and I'll win 1 million kids with them. See, it took me a long time. From the time I was injured on July the 26th, 1969, from that riverbank in Vietnam to a little town called Salem, Oregon, on January the 1st, 1 second past midnight, 1985, when I stood before a congregation of people and I dealt with the question for the last time, I looked at them and I said, tonight, I finally am prepared to declare I'm glad I was injured in Vietnam. I would never ask for it. I would never solicit it. But because now I can see that God is going to use this for something bigger than me, I accept it joyfully. And from that day, from that moment, I quit worrying about it. It didn't matter anymore. I discovered that what he had told me before was true. It just took a long time to get it through my thick skull. That whether or not he took my scars away, his grace was sufficient, and this thorn in my flesh was immaterial.
What were the scars necessary for? I think Dave often says, I speak a universal language. It's a language of pain. And I've seen this happen. Well, Dave got an invitation to come to El Salvador and speak in public schools across the country of El Salvador. And I said, it's not going to work. A lot of the humor didn't work. A lot of Dave's jokes fell flat. A lot of things. But when he got through speaking, he was mobbed. Kids were crying. They were holding on to him. And I was standing back in awe, and I was saying to myself, what's happening here? You know, and so when it was all finished, we discussed it. And Dave said, I told you, I speak a universal language. Every one of those kids has been hurt. And just because you can't see the scars, it doesn't mean there's not pain there. And so he said, when I come before them, they see my scars. And when I tell them that I've gone through hell, and then I'm coming back and I'm saying, I love you and God loves you, they're going to listen. It doesn't matter whether the humor communicates. It doesn't matter if they understand everything. From my heart to their heart, they know here's a man who has hurt, and he still has won. I hurt, therefore I can win.
God takes human tragedy and turns it into triumph. He will use every human experience that we will yield to him, and he'll make something so beautiful out of it. And I have no doubt whatsoever that on that day in Vietnam, the devil loaded his cannon. He lit the fuse, aimed, and fired his best shot. And 23 years later, I'm still cotton picking here, because greater is he that's in me than he that's in the world. That's why he allowed it. We ran 8 miles every day for 8 weeks. And if you've never seen a fat boy run 8 miles, it's totally awesome. 15 minutes after we got through running, I was still jiggling all over. I lost so much weight, I had to tease the hair on my legs to keep my socks up. They said, we're going to teach you how to live without eating food. I learned to do that in the Bible college cafeteria. We prayed for our food there, intercessory prayer. But we never laid hands on it with our eyes closed. Then they said, we're going to teach you how to use your hands and feet like weapons. I was supposed to be able to walk up, kick a man in the face, splinter the bone in his nose, drive it in his brain, and kill him. Now, I didn't, so don't get excited. But just knowing I could made me feel like Joe Cool. Then I found out you have to find Joe Fool who's going to stand there and let you kick his nose into his brain. We practiced kicking at 7-foot targets. I got to Vietnam and everybody was 4.5 feet tall. I hopped over. I missed.
Dave has a miraculous way of taking all of that anger and turning it into an energy to reach out to other people. I know that there are times that there is so much frustration with not being able to perhaps make things go as they would have if he had not been injured. But he's been able to take all of that frustration and bundle it up into a ball of energy so that he can continue to talk to other people and to tell people of the love of God. And so he's actually controlled that feeling of frustration and anger to win other people to the Lord.
Some years ago, Dave was speaking at a youth convention in Minnesota. I think there were about 3,000 young people there. And in the course of the convention, they had a communion service. And the man who was conducting that communion service had a wine press. It was a very small one. It had a handle that you turn like that to compress the grapes. And as it compressed the grapes, the juice ran out. Now, in this convention, Dave had already shared his testimony of his pain, his suffering, the things that he went through and came through victorious. And as Jack Strom was telling this story, and he was squeezing that down, and I mean, you can sit there and visibly see the suffering of Jesus, the pressure that was being applied to him through the physical suffering. And he described in detail when they nailed him to the cross exactly what it did. He had a report from doctors of how this would affect the bones, the ligaments. And he went through all of these things, describing in exquisite detail the pain and the suffering that Jesus went through. And then he turned to Dave and he pointed his finger right in his face and he said, "And Dave Roever, you've never suffered like that." And he went back and he finished the story. When Dave told me about this, Dave said that day he was sitting on the platform and the table with that wine press was right in front of him, and it had a pan down here, and the juice of the grapes was dripping into that pan. Dave said he sat there for 3 hours. The place was cleared out. Everybody was gone. The cleanup people were in there sweeping the floor. And he was sitting there staring at that drip and saying, "Jesus, I've never suffered for you. I don't know what it means to suffer." And it's very easy sometimes for us to try to compare suffering. and I understand the temptation to do that, but we can't comprehend the suffering that Jesus went through. And if someone who's gone through what Dave has gone through can sit there for 3 hours trying to comprehend that suffering whenever he has suffered so much himself, the only thing I can say is that we can't possibly. It's something that has to be spiritually apprehended. And that day, I know because I knew the Dave before that experience in Minnesota, and I knew the Dave after that experience in Minnesota. He was two different people.
When I left the hospital, it was the most terrible days of my life for fear of what I assumed to be imminent rejection. No amount of prayer and no amount of wishing seemed to be capable of taking the scars off my face or straightening crooked fingers. But I'm glad to tell you today that no matter what condition my body may stand herein, as the Lord Almighty is my witness, the spirit of this man does not have even the hint of a scar, because the great physician Jesus has done a remarkable job of healing. And I give him my greatest and my deepest appreciation tonight. May God bless you, and enjoy the Billy Graham Crusade tonight. Praise the Lord. Throughout the course of sharing my experiences, I think probably the most important thing I share is that scars are things that are ugly, but they're the evidence of healing. You don't have a scar unless there was first a wound. Now, if the wound does not heal, then you die. And a scar is evidence of a wonderful thing. It's called healing. Nobody wants scars. I don't want scars. I don't think you want scars. I don't believe anybody wants scars. But if it's the alternative to death, then bring them on. And for many people that have been wounded, some sexually abused, some who've been addicts to drugs or alcohol, others whose wounds are nothing more than just the fact that they've never accepted Christ and don't know Jesus. And in their lives, they're empty, they're lonely. These are wounds. Now, those things have to be healed. Today we hear so much about people who've been abused, especially if it's a sexual abuse, and how there has to be so much therapy and so much healing. If there's no healing spiritually, then the scars will take you out. And I'm saying today that I look back over the years and the whole Vietnam scene, as bad as it was, for me personally, it was a devastating tragedy that only Christ could bring me through. And without His help, there is no healing for your scars. A scar is the evidence of a wound. A wound is the evidence that you've been hurt. And the only healing is Jesus Christ. And I would ask you right now to consider what this is all about. Everything that we've talked about. Put it into perspective right now and say, where do I fit in this picture? I was like the old car. I had to have the hand of God intervene in my life. My hands intervened in the life of this old car, or it would have been a pile of junk forever destroyed. And right now, Jesus can save you from being a pile of junk. And He can turn your life around. Why not make this commitment to Christ? And if you want to pray it with me, man, do it. Do it right now. With great joy, I would love to know that you have followed me in this commitment. And simply repeat these words. Say, Lord Jesus, by faith, though I cannot see you and I cannot touch you, yet by faith, I choose to believe in you. Forgive me of my sins that have wounded me and have left me scarred. I need your touch. Would you come into my life and restore me, redeem me, and return me to the original value that you made me to be. I receive you by faith. In Jesus' name, amen. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing.